Hi, and welcome to the InnovationAus Leadership Council in conversation with Nick Abrahams and Nick Lennon. With increased focus worldwide on tackling ransomware, the Australian government recently released its own Ransomware Action Plan. This plan aims to tackle ransomware with new legislation, mandatory reporting, and a range of other measures. The details of the plan are still being formulated, but today, to pull it apart, I have the pleasure of bringing together two leaders in the space to help us better understand the plan. Nick Lennon is the ANZ Country Manager for Email Security and Cyber Resilience company Mimecast, and Nick Abraham is the Global Co-Leader of the Digital Transformation Practice at Norton Rose Fulbright, and also a well-known futurist and technology commentator. So the question is the Ransomware Action Plan a solid foundation on which we can build our defence against ransomware? Does it go far enough? What else needs to happen? I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to hand over to you, Nick Lennon. Where are we at with this plan? What do we need to understand about it?
Great. Thanks, Corey. And always exciting to be chatting to Nick about what's most meaningful for Australian businesses. So I'm sure we've got an exciting discussion heading up now. Look, I think what the Australian government is doing around the Ransomware Action Plan is a meaningful step forward and really demonstrates how regulations are catching up to some of the technology advances and technology challenges we've seen that really does impact Australian businesses. But we've just come through the pandemic and we've seen the challenges of COVID. And when we look at a ransomware action plan that's asking for 2% of Australian businesses to be reporting ransomware, the reality is that is 2% of, people vaccinated in Australia, would that be seen as a success when we look at a recent pandemic? So there's an interesting and balanced view that we'll take in the next 15 to 20 minutes to understand the positives and what we're really seeing as a meaningful step forward in regulation, closing the gap, but also understanding what is the sort of remaining gap that might be impacting Australian society. So on that, Nick, I'd love to sort of open up this discussion and get you to fill us in on what the real sort of essence of the Ransomware Action Plan actually is.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Nick and Corey. Terrific to be here. And, maybe if I start out with, my thoughts on ransomware and the government's responsibility perhaps verge more towards the philosophical, and that if you think about the social contract that we have with government, government keeps us safe and we pay our taxes. So that's the deal, and they basically, they have a police force, so if anything, if we should get assaulted or something like that, there would be, some degree of support provided by the police force and so forth. So they chased down the criminals and brought them to justice. And indeed, if we suffered some sort of injustice, there's compensation and so forth available. So you look at that at the policing level, state level, and then at the federal level, we have the Defence Force, and they keep us safe from sovereign attack. And so it's interesting that ransomware really falls between the cracks. And I'm not criticising the government at all, because every government around the world is struggling with this. But it's a fascinating situation because I don't think there's a parallel for it anywhere, in that we're seeing individual citizens impacted in a criminal way, and organisations, small or large, impacted in a criminal way. And government, unfortunately, is powerless to stop it to a large degree. And so what the Ransomware Action Plan is, as I think, as Nick said, it's a good first step. And I think that's right. It's, we need to be doing something at the policy level. And so effectively what the Ransomware Action Plan, at its core, it just says that if you're a company that has over $10 million of turnover, then if you get hit with a ransomware attack, then you have to notify. So that's at its core. There's some beefed up powers to various government agencies and so forth to bring actions against perpetrators and so forth. Interesting to a degree, but the reality is that most of these perpetrators are offshore, and so our ability to actually bring them to justice is quite limited. So at its core, you're looking at, if you've got turnover over $10 million, then this would be relevant to you.
Yeah, and I think that in itself is a really positive sign that the government stood there, which is that we don't want something that is falling between the cracks of society, as you described, between sort of national defence and sort of, the local police jurisdiction. We've got such a big gap in modern business, and the reality of revenue or money, funds leaving the country funding sort of, I guess, these hacking organizations, the volume that we're seeing ransomware start to impact the economy. I think that's a real positive in the sense that now we're seeing visibility of that and recognizing that the government wants to be able to control that for, I guess, the benefits of understanding how we continue to build on this to, I guess, defend the Australian economy and defend Australian businesses.
Yeah, I agree. I think the economic impact is really important to note. There's been a lot of quite significant data breach cases. People rarely, when they do get impacted by a ransomware attack, rarely do they come out publicly and say it's a ransomware attack. But we know that there's been a number of high-profile data breach cases, a number of which we can surmise are ransomware related. And the impact on those organisations and the flow on is obviously very, very bad from an economic point of view. But then what we've seen is the ransomware perpetrators are now focusing on healthcare as well as critical infrastructure. So it's important that the government be putting this on the agenda. I know that boards are very much putting it on the agenda. In fact, I do a ransomware simulation for boards, and where I take them through the 6 key issues that they need to resolve before they figure out whether they should pay the ransom or not. And what's fascinating is, despite the fact I've done it a number of times, I have never had a unanimous board where everyone goes, you know what, we should pay the ransom. Because it actually, for a board, it's very different to any other decision it's ever made. Because at its core, the decision is, should we pay a criminal to get a better outcome for our company? And that is quite challenging at an ethical level. So I think it's a huge issue for Australia and for companies particularly.
And it's interesting because I think the big question that we're seeing now is how do organisations view the ROI of cybersecurity spend in a more meaningful way, and by spending $1 in that protection sort of offsets sort of a much bigger sum that could be paid after an event like this. So we are seeing that drive maturity at all levels of sort of business and governments as we start to really think through what does cyber safe really mean to us in this modern economy. So that's a positive, and I think that's a real positive of where the regulation's going to drive a change in behaviour and elevate the executives that are responsible for cybersecurity in sort of Australian businesses because of the increased regulations and reporting requirements that this responsibility now asks of them.
Yeah, I think that's right. Nothing frees up budget, quite like when the board starts to become responsible at a legal level for issues. And so that's what we're seeing, with the Ransomware Action Plan. We'll see, legal obligations there, the security of critical infrastructure changes that are coming through is seeing heightened focus on boards being responsible. So I do think that, we will certainly start to see people get more focused on this, and that means that there should be more budget. And what we don't want to be is, I had a situation with a client who was hit by a ransomware attack, decent sized business, probably enterprise value, a couple of $100 million, so solid business. And the CEO said to me when this was happening, when they're in the eye of the storm, said, "This is really unfair." And I looked at that organisation; it wasn't very well prepared, frankly. They didn't have, they hadn't spent sufficient money on cybersecurity. It hadn't been a focus, and they didn't have any plan for how they were going to respond to any cybersecurity breach. So I don't think that is good governance these days. I think every organisation needs to think through, what is its cybersecurity posture, and it has to be, a line item now in budgets to make sure you're keeping the company, your employees and your customers and key stakeholders safe.
I just wanted to ask a question, because we're obviously talking about organisations that are going to qualify the 10 million. So you're talking about a different sort of resourcing, having a board structure. And obviously there's a consideration for the onerousness of being able to comply if you're a smaller organisation. But as we know, they're an important part of the Australian economy. Is this the start to help understand what's required, how this process will work? And, would you both like to see it move into a more general, the action plan being expanded?
I'm happy to take that. So, Corey, presumably you're saying should it drop down to small and medium business, so turnover less? Look, I think so. This is a good start. So let's give some accolades there. But where does it really get us? I think it's interesting what they're doing in the US now. So there's just been a bill introduced, which is a ransom payment notification obligation. So I think that's a meaningful step. Because I think it's a very important thing to know how much is being paid in ransom, who's paying it, and so forth. So I think it would be great to see that. That would be sort of my first change, if you like, in terms of driving it down, below the 10 million. So what we do know is that the perpetrators are very good at effectively targeting the folks who are going to pay, and often, there's a lot of folks in that sub $10 million turnover space. So provided that the reporting obligations are not onerous, then I'd be comfortable to see that drop down below the 10 million. There are some other things which I think we can which might we could look at into the future, but I'll let Nick talk to that specific point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. And I think what we're seeing with critical national infrastructure and the sort of ransomware action plan, you sort of do feel as though government and those entities that are really the backbone of the Australian economy are going to lift their sort of level of due diligence around cybersecurity and sort of conform to some of the regulation on the C&I side. And I think with Ransomware Action Plan, you're going to see enterprise move, and many of those organisations obviously had the budget and the resources, as Nick's alluded to. But I guess that does leave a bit of a sort of potential risk for other organisations because they get seen as the easier target. And a hacker sending a malware, ransomware campaign to a large enterprise or to a medium enterprise, it's the same level of investment for them, but maybe now with, a faster return and sort of more awareness that that's not going to get as big there's less barriers to be effective. So that's a really interesting one. And I think what we at Mimecast were doing was looking at what are those pivotal moments in society where we saw significant societal change. And as Nick alluded to at the start, what we have with cybersecurity and ransomware is a unique issue that government's really struggling to support business around. And that got us thinking about what did it look like in other areas of our sort of society prior to change. And the thing that we were considering is what did society look like prior to Medicare? And that for us was the sort of a shift where in the early 70s, you saw a lot of families who were dealing with, health and medical issues who would be spending a lot of money that was unplanned, that would come at a random time, depending on when a health issue sort of hit. And often the sort of money would dry up when they're in hospital. So what would be the follow-on care or the support needed for that individual to sort of get back to sort of routine and get back to their lives? And then Medicare came through the sort of mid-70s to early 80s, and we started to see this sort of nearly a protection layer for society, where at that point in time, every sort of Australian citizen had the ability to get access to medical services that would protect them. And in doing so, I guess the question that could be asked is, what's the benefit that we've seen in society by Australia having that sort of protection layer for everyone to get access to appropriate healthcare and health services? And as we reflect on that, what we believe is that Medicare has provided a ability for our economy to, elevate over time, because we've seen people that are able to use their, funds to invest in business, invest in sort of services, think about their future, think about their family's welfare, and start to sort of move up rather than seeing this cost that might come at an unplanned time being a burden on sort of their lives. So it presents an interesting sort of contrast to where we find ourselves at the moment with cybersecurity and ransomware specifically. Like, is this the opportunity for some different thinking in this SME area where there's an opportunity for industry, education, government to come together and to think about how SME get access to appropriate cybersecurity services that might provide that sort of protection layer across all businesses? So I think what we're seeing with the Ransomware Action Plan is some great leadership in regards to having policy there. But does that open up a bigger opportunity now as we start to extend that responsibility and accessibility into the SMEs by getting different thinking?
So it's a very interesting analogy, Nick. I hadn't sort of thought of it quite that way, but I guess we started out at the top of the discussion with that idea of what is the government's responsibility to its citizens as regards keeping them safe online, and can it be said to be similar to the healthcare proposition? And I think and for the SMEs, is there some sort of compensation fund? Is there some sort of layer of support that gets given for free or at a marginal cost? Interesting idea. I think what may drive this is in cyber insurance. So I think up until now, cyber insurance has been affordable, and the cyber insurers will pay the ransom to a large degree. What we have seen recently is cyber insurance is definitely getting far more expensive. So I can see that starting to get priced out of the market. So, government always believes that it has a role where there's market failure. So if as a business you can't get insurance, should the government step in? So that would be an interesting development. And then we are seeing that insurers are really not that keen on paying. So they're starting to write that out of policy. So if they don't pay the ransom, that could have very profound impact on this business model for the perpetrators going forward.
And it's interesting, I guess, through the pandemic, we've seen government step in to sort of protect business. And I think in some ways we've seen an economy sort of being able to come out of it and bounce back. Obviously, we don't know what the impact to future generations is yet, and that's something that we'll sort of, I guess, have to work through. But yeah, I think for what we see with the SME sector is how do organisations know where they stand, and is that maybe the opportunity for sort of a SME health check that sort of allows people to have that awareness, and maybe that's the sort of I guess the baseline. And then organisations, based on their own sort of profitability and success, able to invest in regards to help speed of recovery. But I do see an opportunity there around cyber skills. So that's obviously going to be a critical skill for future generations, and sort of by thinking differently about it, that brings the skills, it brings industry, it brings innovation. And do we see a more advanced digital economy going forward for Australia as a result of having that protection layer across this part of our economy? So I think what we're seeing is innovation, and I think we are living through change, and therefore change does present opportunity for future generations.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I think I've got this vague recollection of maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago. One minister said Australia was going to be famous for cybersecurity, and we're going to that was going to be one of our key planks upon which to build a vibrant technology workforce. So I think it would be worth revisiting that. And is there as you've said more of a broader plan around helping SMBs? One thing I did just want to touch on is because I have been thinking about how do we stop this insidious practice? And an area that I have my own sort of just I'm not 100% one way or the other on is whether actually banning payments. So actually, if we made it illegal to pay the ransom, there's obviously a school of thought that says if it's illegal, then you kill the business model. And so if people don't pay, there won't be ransomware perpetrated. So I think there's some validity to that argument. I am, however, very concerned that if we did make it illegal, organisations would still want to pay, and you risk driving the behaviour underground, and that then exposes those organisations to even more potential extortion. And then we have the vexed issue of where do you draw the line? Because if it is a ransomware attack on some on a hospital or medical facility, and by paying the ransom you can help critically sick people, should the ransom be able to pay? be paid. So anyway, it's a discussion which is being had right at the moment, looking at the Ransomware Action Plan. And once again, I don't have the solution, but I'm very aware that there are two very significant arguments, one for and one against on it.
And you can see market forces being a really interesting lens here, where you look at like the cost of business and the cost of investing in cybersecurity, allowing or meaning that organisations don't need to pay, that they therefore are offering a level of protection to their suppliers, supply chains, customers. And then you could see a second tier of economy that isn't making that investment, that is then sort of running the gauntlet and maybe sort of dealing with the sort of payments sort of in an illegal sense. So, yeah, I think that it's a very interesting landscape that we find ourselves in. And I think market forces in this area is going to be another lens to look at as organisations have to invest if we see the regulation starting to increase in this area.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the government can only do so much. And, the key takeaway from this is that a good cybersecurity posture is critical for all organisations, regardless of your size. And back up. It's about recognising that the risk is out there, the risk is significant, and it's likely to happen to your organisation. And you need to be in a position where you can restore as quickly as possible. So, cybersecurity budget is critical for all organisations.
I couldn't agree more. And I think as a society, awareness, like I look at it through the lens of like we're sort of educating the board, as you've described earlier in this session. We're seeing IT sort of as a leadership group now in regards to driving digital transformation in the modern economy. But I think the work that we do to educate employees and citizens of sort of the responsibilities of being good online sort of citizens is just so important for the world that we're working towards. So, awareness and cybersecurity spend and seeing a better ROI on the spend rather than paying a ransomware at the end of the day is going to be far more meaningful.
I think you could both talk about this all day. There is a lot of...
I am just conscious of the time.
Well, I'm just thinking it covers so many things because we're talking about how these sorts of plans bring not just the kind of immediate result, but start that ripple effect of uplift across the economy. Like, where do we start? What does it mean? How is it refined? And Nick Abrahams, he brought up lots of really philosophical questions as well about, and I like the idea about Medicare, the way we look at that challenge today and what the transition is and how we'll look at it in 5 and 10 years. There's no doubt it's an incredibly important topic, and hearing all the noises about how big this challenge is. So it's a great discussion to look at this particular initiative from your perspective. So thank you both for joining today. It's been a delight to talk to you.
Fantastic.
Thanks very much.